doing all that work and I'll be doing the fun stuff. Well, she'll be doing the fun stuff and I'll be doing the hard stuff. Yeah. Doing all that. All right, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And inshallah, today we're going to be continuing the hadith that we were doing. So let's look at hadith. Well, yesterday we did a number of different hadith, but let's look at the last hadith, 106. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تنكح المرأة لأربع: لمالها ولحسبها ولجمالها ولدينها فاظفر بذات الدين تربت يداك. That women are basically chosen in marriage for four reasons: for their wealth, for their lineage, for their beauty, and choosing piety is basically the preferred one because that's what would actually mark as the best gain that you would get, because all the other things would basically wear out with time. So, except religious integrity. Okay, so we said the same thing when it comes to husbands. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا جَاءَكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. If you get a man, a proposal that is of a man that has good deen and religious integrity, that is, and has a good character, then get him married. In other words, that's the person that you would really want to choose over all other qualities, because you'll find yourself missing out on what's more important. You can have the money, but the money doesn't bring you happiness. You can have probably appearance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a person that is necessarily fulfilling your needs. And there's one thing I would like to say. I always tell this to the girls. When they write their profiles for marriage, they would put in things like good looking, has a job, has a degree of this uh, master's or PhD or whatever it is, and they would get into a number of different lists. And same thing with the guys. They would also put in, usually, when the guys make their profiles. I mean, I worked in matchmaking for a while. When the guys write their profiles, they're usually short. Okay. They're very short. Um, so he more wants a certain appearance. He more wants someone that probably has maybe one, papers, two, a certain appearance, definitely height and weight are definitely of a concern for them, and the appearance, and certainly the country that this person is coming from is an issue for them. And number three, whether she has kids or not, or has been or had been married before or not. For women, the story is different. They definitely, I would say, in some sense, they are more mature in knowing what they're supposed to be looking for, but they completely fail in understanding how to put that on ground. So what does that mean? So when you see a woman's profile, she would say he has to have a good job, and definitely looks at whether he does have the legal documents or not. Three, does also look at appearance. That's a very important thing for women as well. And the country that they're living in, or whether, they use the word fob, which basically means fresh off the boat, I guess, just to break down this acronym. And they would also look at whether they're romantic or not, charming, funny, all these different things. In other words, certain things in character. And one thing that I noticed is that in terms of theory, women look at things from the theory standpoint, that yes, if he has a good job, that means he should be stable. If he is good looking, that means he will have a certain level of, I guess, giving her maybe romance, a sense of belonging, etc. But then one thing I would always tell men and women, especially women, women, they sometimes look into theory more than into practice. So what does that mean? Considering a person having a degree or not, a master's degree, PhD, they would think that if a person has this degree, that means they're understanding. If a person has a personality that is funny, etc., that means they're going to be out easy and outgoing and all of that. If a person is good looking, that means they're going to fulfill what she's looking for in a man. And I would say, in theory, it could be easy to think that if a person is educated, has a degree, that means this person is understanding. But that's not necessarily the case. A degree doesn't necessarily reflect understanding, and a person that is rich does not necessarily, or richness does not necessarily reflect that a person is going to be hospitable, that you're going to live with money available to you. He could have that money in his bank account and not necessarily use it. He just feels secure looking at that money being like a big number in his bank account, but he doesn't like spending. So some rich people are they're very stingy and they don't want you to spend. I would say a degree doesn't resemble understanding. Money does not resemble a hospitable person, and appearance doesn't necessarily resemble that this person is going to be caring for you and the person that you would really wish that he would be. And I had seen this very often, that people would confuse even religiosity. Just because he stands on a pulpit, just because he is called a sheikh, it doesn't make him religious. I know that sounds shocking, but I have had many women that are married to shuyukh, married to these guys that are on the pulpits very many times, and would always complain that they have the worst manners, that they are very narcissist, that they are very this, and it becomes something that you would say. I'm not here necessarily saying if it's a religious person, that means he's not going to be a good husband. Well, that's contradictory to what the hadith is saying. But I'm basically saying just because a person has a religious appearance, that doesn't necessarily make them religious. Okay, just because a person has a degree, that doesn't mean that they're understanding. Just because the person has the money, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be hospitable or that they're going to basically offer you the money that you had dreamed of having. And it's important to scrutinize the person. Just because they have a religious appearance, it doesn't mean that they're religious. Dig further and really see whether this person really has the religiosity that they are wearing. Make sure that this person, when they have a degree, dig further to make sure that this person has the understanding that they're probably carrying. A degree might sometimes be manipulative. You can have a PhD and a master's and all of that and really be the most ignorant, the person that lacks the understanding. And I'm sorry, but this person could be the stupidest person. He's got the degree, he's a doctor, but he can't even comprehend what you're saying.
Oh, you mean
He
like
doesn't.
just common sense and
It's not just common sense, Nora.
okay.
It's what does it mean to be understanding? What it means to be understanding one is for a woman in life, it's completely different than being book smart. You can be book smart and you've got the high IQ to prove your intelligence, okay? But then in understanding, one, how to make decisions, understanding how to communicate with you, take the time to listen to your words and show you if you're at fault, if you're misunderstanding something, take the time to explain it to you rather than shout out and start shouting and start yelling and start swearing. Take the time. That's not an understanding person. That's a person that can't even break down. If you can't break down the information, you cannot communicate. That's not an understanding person. That's a person that wants to enforce their ideas, and then that's going to become definitely hard to deal with. An understanding person, it doesn't matter what degree you have, an understanding person is a person gives you time to speak, gives you time to at least absorb what you're saying, has the ability to break down your idea, has the ability to understand where you're coming from, and therefore has the ability to discuss and, let's say, discuss the ideas, and at the same time, based on that, has the ability to make the right decisions to get to the best results and the best consequences. That's an understanding person. Yes, certainly experience comes in, and definitely communication is also necessary, because if you're not on the same boat and you're going to start panicking, where are you taking us? That's not an understanding person. Okay, perhaps, yes, I trust your manhood. I trust what you're saying. But if you're not going to give that woman the time and the respect, then are you really here with an understanding person? You thought that the degree was going to lead to it, but that's not necessarily the case. Studies actually say that, you will be really surprised, but studies say that most of the narcissist behavior, because it's not necessarily something that you are born with, it's a number of different things contribute to these people becoming like that. Whether it's the parenting, the wrong parenting, or whether it's probably the different potentials that they had managed to see, and then with their evil character, they had managed to know how to make it channel to their own interests. And you would see a lot of these very intelligent people, very rich people, actually be very narcissist. They could be doctors, principals, they could be religious appearance people. They would look like a sheikh, but in reality, they're using religion for their own interest. They're using, remember, even Fir'aun, in order to get himself into, I guess, finding people accepting him, and in order to get the people to accept him, he used a religious appearance himself. He said, "Inni akhafu an yubaddila dinakum." I fear that he will tamper and will change your religion and change the principles that you had lived based on to make your civilization. Or I worry about Musa, that is, that he might bring corruption to the society. Why? Because if you are so concerned about corruption, you're so concerned about the principles, that means you must be a person that really embraces that. Because if you're concerned about it, that, of course, that's the narrative that he wanted people to believe in. And that's very important to just take in realization, because many times that's the part that women fail in, from my experience. And that's why it's necessary to have a wali on board. Can the wali also fail? The answer is yes. A wali can also fail, can also get manipulated, can fail. But I had seen that more women are actually manipulated by these people and than men. I don't know what it is, what kind of social intelligence that maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given men. I don't know. Maybe a neuroscientist would explain this one better. But certainly, let's call it the anecdotal piece of it. And definitely it's also coming from let's say, the text itself that's telling us that you have to have a wali. And why would that be important? It's basically not necessarily as of course, the feminists would like to say that this is patriarchy, etc. It's not patriarchy. It has nothing to do with considering that women are less or anything of that sort or inferior. It's an issue of what we need to do is channel these potentials that are God-given, that are basically wired within your brain or within his brain, to help you make the right and most accurate decision making. You've got certain potentials and your wali has certain potentials. Let's work both of you together to make sure that you are not being manipulated into the wrong answer and the wrong consequence. So we want you to work both together and see whether this person really is living, one, the deen, the health, the nafs, the aql, the mindset, the education. 3, the ird, the chastity, the appearance, the family, etc. And 4 or 5, the wealth. These things can only be studied by looking at a person's history. We cannot look at a person's future but through one lens, which is history. So when we look at that area of studying their history, their background, usually women, I'll say it that way, usually women would come in and say, but he became better, but he got a job and he's been in this job for a year now. Believe it or not, that's not even enough. If he's been a dropout in school, a dropout in even his family, a dropout in everything, that really tells us something about his personality. Just because he said a nice word here and there, and just because he just knows. And by the way, men have the ability to be con artists more than women. This is real. This is real. They know how to put on an image in order to get to their interests. How to put on an image of a kind, charming person, funny person, a person that is living the money, etc. They're experts. They can be experts in making you believe an image that is completely different. And they know that women fall for kindness and affection and romantic words. They know that very well. And they know how to manipulate a woman to make her feel that she is the best and most beautiful woman on earth and what would attract a woman's heart, etc. They know that women fall for these kind of words because she is looking for security. That's part of her instinct. And they will say words that will enhance the feeling of security inside your heart in order to win your heart. And then you discover that this person is actually there's a saying that says, not everyone that's smiling at you is necessary, not everyone that's showing you their teeth is necessarily giving you a smile, right? Uh, I don't know if there's an equivalent proverb in English, but in that's a common proverb that we would use in Arabic. Not because they're giving you and showing you their teeth, it doesn't mean they're smiling at you. They could actually be the ones to hide and conceal a lot of evilness. So really be careful. Okay, let's go for 107 before we get carried away. عن أسامة بن زيد بن حارثة رضي الله عنهما قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما تركت بعدي فتنة هي أضر على الرجال من النساء. Okay. What does that mean? I have not left behind any trial more harmful to men than women. Okay. I know that English translation might sound like it's making women as if they were nothing but evil things and evil beings. That's not necessarily what the Arabi is showing. Okay, so in English, she said, be mindful of wolves in sheep's clothing. I like that one. Okay, be mindful of wolves in sheep clothing. Lovely, lovely. Good job, good girl. All right, let's go back to ما تركت بعدي فتنة هي أضر على الرجال من النساء. So in English, like I said, it sounds as if it is saying that women are evil. And it sounds that, well, their trials, they're evil, etc. But that's not what the hadith is saying. It's not necessarily saying that women are evil, if that's the connotation you're getting. That's not what it's saying. It's basically saying that men are more susceptible to falling in the different trials that affect their deen if it's basically a woman involved. In other words, if it's a woman involved, they would have a fitna or a trial. They're more susceptible to probably losing their deen if it's basically that, let's call it the lust is involved, because they have an inner desire in order to basically get, I guess, fulfill their sexual desire. So women act as the biggest fitna. So the Prophet ﷺ was really telling men and women as well, because that's the same thing. Even if we were to look at it from the other end, there's no bigger fitna on women than men. It's the same thing, because it's part of our animal instinct, the area of reproduction. It's part of our instinct that we're looking for areas to fulfill it, or we're looking for a mate, let's say it that way. And of course, if it's a man, he's looking for a female mate. And if it's a woman, she's looking for a male mate. It's part of your instinct. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling you that that's the biggest area of fitna, because the person would be looking for mating. And of course, if it's outside of marriage, then that would actually be haram. That would be zina. But the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that the toughest and the hardest fitna is really the mating fitna. Let's call it that way. The mating fitna is the hardest fitna. So how to avoid and how to, let's say, secure our deen from such a fitna. Number one, lowering the gaze. Number two, not being alone with a man or being alone with a woman, basically just making sure that there's this distance. And number three, avoiding al-ikhtilat in general, avoiding mixing with men mixing with women, or women mixing with men, etc., avoiding such ikhtilat. And certainly number four, even if we're speaking about ikhtilat, it's not just ikhtilat meaning intermingling in physically, but it also would mean intermingling intermingling, even in speech. So even if we're speaking about men talking to women, and certainly whether it's men or women, intermingling in speech, a person, we would say in Arabic, والأذن تعشق قبل العين أحيانا, that sometimes the ear can love faster than the eyes themselves. Just loved the speech, loved the comfort that this person's speech had given you, whether it's a female or a male, and then without us realizing, we would fall in that fitna. And certainly, of course, to stay away from this fitna, marriage is important. Marriage is important because it basically fulfills the need that is basically your instinct. Okay, so you're doing it in the halal way to reduce, of course, the need, the desire from being this potential that is controlling you, to you giving it a halal channel, and that way you will be stronger in facing that fitness. So marriage is a sunnah, and it could be obligatory on the person depending on the person, depending on the case, etc. So it's not the same for everyone. Let's go for hadith number 108. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب. What is forbidden by breastfeeding is forbidden by lineage. Okay, I mean, I like that translation. So right, I mean, that's a lot of details. But I guess he just wanted a short hadith, so fair enough. يحرم من الرضاع. So what is forbidden in terms of let's say, a man getting married? Of course, you can't get married to your mother, you can't get married to your sister, you can't get married to your maternal aunts, paternal aunts, and great grandmothers, your nieces, your nephews, etc. That's the same thing, that you're going to draw the different, let's call them the different traces, and you're going to consider, just like you would have a woman that nursed you is your biological mother that had you, basically, that gave birth to you, and you're going to basically lay out the same paradigm. The woman that nursed you, and we're speaking about, according to the majority of the scholars, especially, well, it's more Shafi'i, it's 5 times of nursing, according to a hadith in Sahih Muslim. So basically, 5 full feedings is then going to consider that this woman that nursed the child is his mother, and the children that this woman had given labor to, or the children that she had also nursed, are also considered siblings to this person. Okay, maybe I should draw that into a drawing, right? Let's do this little drawing. Okay, maybe we could use a Microsoft Word, and that way it'll be something that is easier to spot, right? So I'm going to use that. I know right now it's not that common to see people nursing and stuff, but right now we do have formula. People are, choosing and preferring using formula.
I actually saw someone in the mall they just weren't even covering themselves.
They weren't covering themselves? And what does that have to do with nursing, Noda?
No, well, you were talking about the nursing that no. Anyway, never mind.
Okay. So they were nursing without covering themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Okay. So, let's look at it. So we've got person. We've got let's give a name right there. We're going to call him Yusuf. Okay. Let's call him Yusuf. Okay. Here's Yusuf right there. Okay. And the woman that nursed him, let's say her name is, I don't know, Wadha. I don't know why we came up with that name. Okay. Sorry. Well, let's call her W. That way we won't get lost. Okay. So here's Yusuf, and his mother That's, sorry about that. You could see I can't draw right. It's not because I'm a bad artist, which I know I am, but it's because I'm using the mouse and on a touchpad. Okay. Okay. So there's Y is Yusuf, and W is basically the woman that nursed Yusuf. Okay. Let's say W nursed other kids. Let's say nursed Talal, so we'll call him T, nursed a boy and a girl. So nurse T and nursed perhaps L. Okay. And she also has biological children of her own. Let's call them B, biological children. Okay. So Yusuf, right there, Y would basically be, let's do it this way, Yusuf would basically be a sibling to woman's biological children. He would be a sibling. So Y cannot get married to B if it's a female. And certainly if this is a female, then if this is a male, they can't get married because they would be considered siblings. Okay. And Y would also be a sibling to T and L, even though they were only nursed. Okay. So he would be a sibling to them as well. Let's go farther. So what about Y? Yusuf has other brothers. One is Adam, and Adam is Yusuf's biological brother, but he didn't nurse from W. Adam is irrelevant entirely to W because she didn't nurse him. So Adam can get married to B and can get married to T or L. Well, T was a boy, so can get married to L because that was a girl. Okay. So just an idea. So when you look at Yusuf, he's biologically a brother to Adam, but not necessarily, of course, through biological relations, of course, not in any relationship biologically with B, T, and L. But we would treat the milk relations the same way that we would treat the biological relations. So Y would be, this would be his mother. Let's just assume Y was a girl. Her W's husband would basically be a mahram to her, to, let's say, assume Y was a girl. So the husband for the woman that nursed the person or nursed the girl would basically be a mahram to the girl, and therefore she can take off her hijab in front of him. She can take him as a mahram to go places, etc. That would be the nursing. Basically, it's called the milk father. Well, it's the woman that gave that milk to the girl. It's not the man. But the Prophet ﷺ had said that if he's the person that had given, let's call it the potential, which basically means that he induced the pregnancy, therefore he induced the milk glands, therefore, that tells us that there's probably a lot more to the DNA that a woman will have with the husband, even if we're speaking about a marriage relationship, that there's a lot more than probably if there's a pregnancy involved, there's a lot more than just the semen that is shared. There's probably other characteristics that are shared without us realizing, maybe with different fluids, etc., that is shared and that's influencing women to the point that it even influences the milk that her body is producing. That's according to the hadith. I wonder if it can go farther I remember reading a study, but I'm not an expert
That's a good
reading.
idea to just investigate.
Yeah,
SubhanAllah.
well, I'm not a scientist here, but there was this interesting study that was saying that certain characteristics in certain pieces of, well, parts of the DNA are actually marked even in a woman's brain. So if, let's say, she gets married to someone, there's some genetic things and some different things that are passed on, and it basically stays. It's like a stamp in the brain, and it never leaves. Even when she gets divorced, yes, she would probably get some of those markers out during iddah, but some of those markers will still stay in the brain. That's quite interesting. It's like a still, a stamp. And well, according to the hadith, that no, it actually, well, I mean, according to hadith, that's not no, but according to the hadith, that even the milk would really share certain genetic things and genetic things in the milk from the man, even though hey, she's the one that nursed the child. The man has nothing to do with it. According to hadith, no. There are some things that you may not realize, and that's why he would be a mahram. That's really interesting.
It's really disturbing in the West, too, that women are so freely selling and giving away their breast milk and not taking into account that their blood children may one day want to marry someone that drank from their breast milk.
Right. It's that's a different for the bank for uh the banks, those banks, and that's a different thing. But I guess yes, it does relate to this one. But I'm thinking, how much of those characteristics are being passed down onto us from the man without us realizing. Do we do the same thing? That's quite interesting. Do we have our influence, at least our genetic influence, on the man? Or are we just an input that there's something that is affecting us from the man, but we're an input that we don't have an output to give him the same? That's quite interesting. Anyhow, let me not get into all these details, but let's just stick to the hadith and what it's implying. Okay, so same thing if we're talking about, let's say, the mother of W. Okay, the mother, well, basically, that would be his grandmother, which is W's mother would be his grandmother. Okay, and certainly W's kids would be, or even the ones that she nursed would be his siblings. And what else? Her sisters would be his aunts. So W's sisters and W's aunt would be also related to him. Exactly the same way that we would speak about let's call it the biological paradigm or the biological system. That's the same thing. So you could just, let's see, babies leave behind DNA in mom's body. Yep. We are fertile soil to receive. Yes, subhanAllah. Fertile, I love that, the way you said it. Fertile soil to receive from the man, or to receive all subhanAllah, where it's just amazing, how I love the wording that you put it in. Fertile soil to receive, and without us realizing, we're receiving from right and left and receiving, and we mirror the people around us, don't we? All right. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم استوصوا بالنساء فإن المرأة خلقت من ضلع, or من ضلع. There's another من ضلع, another way of saying it. Okay. وإن أعوج شيء في الضلع أعلاه. فإن ذهبت تقيمه كسرته وإن تركته لم يزل أعوج فاستوصوا بالنساء خيرا. So is this praising or is this not praising women? Let's look at it. What is it really saying? Take care of women. Okay. For women were created from a rib. Okay. And the most crooked part of the rib is its upper part. If you try to straighten it, you will break it. And if you leave it alone, it will remain crooked. So take care of women. So is this a metaphor or is this really true? Is it like the anatomy, a woman's anatomy? Is it really crooked? Well, wait a minute. If you want to call something crooked, that means you're using a paradigm to consider it as straight. And then based on that paradigm, you're calling it crooked because you're comparing it to something. So one thing is that this hadith basically is looking at a number of different things. Number one is that certainly when you look at istawsu bin nisa, the Prophet, what is al-wasiyya? What is istawsu bin nisa? Istawsu bin nisa is a straight word that the Prophet is basically telling the men, take care of them as much as you can. You got to embrace even the shortcomings. Some things could be different. They're a different anatomy. They're a different psychology. They're a different character. So you can't necessarily force them to becoming like you. You just have to understand that they're different, that they are, they're psychologically different. They're physically different, and therefore you cannot necessarily force her to be the same character, the same psychology, the same physiology as you. So that's what the Prophet is simply saying. But let's look at this one. فَإِنَّ الْمَرْأَ خُلِقَتْ مِنْ ضِلَعٍ or ضِلَعٍ, that a woman was created from the rib. What does that mean, that she was created from the rib? Is it true that Adam was created and then she basically came out of the shoulder, came out of the rib, came out of the side? What does that really mean? So this is pretty much the only hadith that basically speaks about a woman being created from the rib. Okay? And we know that in the Old Testament, it says the same thing, that she was created. So when we're speaking about Eve being created from Adam, how did that creation actually happen? So this is part of alam al-ghaib. And what does it mean? Like, how did she come out? What does that even look like? Well, certainly we can't use our modern let's say understanding, because this definitely was an exceptional thing, something that was not necessarily that we can find maybe traces to proving it, or maybe we can one day. Who knows? Are we going to be capable of proving anything of that sort? Maybe, who knows? But this hadith is really clear that that Eve, at least, was created from Adam's ribs. Now, one thing is that it says فَإِنَّ الْمَرْأَ خُلِقَتْ مِنْ ضِلْعٍ or ضِلَعٍ, that she basically was created from a rib. In other words, she's part of something, but not necessarily the complete of what you are. So does that mean a woman is missing certain characteristics? That means the man is complete and she's incomplete? No, there's nothing in the hadith that is necessarily saying that, but I would like to say, just give me a second. I would like to say that indeed, historically speaking, scholars did, and I mean great scholars, did debate whether men are complete and women are incomplete, and whether one is better than the other, and so forth, and all these kinds of debates. But I personally consider that such a debate is a futile debate. It doesn't make sense to discuss who's better because he cannot live without her and she cannot live without this man as well. So they complete one another. So to consider one as being, well, the missing component or the missing piece, and one is incomplete and the other one is complete, is also not fair because they depend on one another. He would be incomplete without her, and she would be incomplete without him. So therefore, they complete one another. And not necessarily one is incomplete and one is complete because he's incomplete without her. So he's still incomplete. And that's why he needed a woman, because he was incomplete. And she's incomplete without a man. That's the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created nature. So now when you look at فَإِنَّ الْمَرْأَ خُلِقَتْ مِنْ ضِلْعٍ or ضِلْعٍ, that there are certain things that relate to basically a woman's anatomy. But what does the word ضِلْع or ضِلْع actually mean? Well, the word ضِلْع actually means a rib or means certain bone structure. So it's focusing on a bone structure. And then it continues in the أعوج شيء في الضلع أعلاه, that the bone structure in a woman in the most crooked area it is in is basically the highest area. So wait a minute, which highest area? Are you talking about the skull here? Are you talking about the ribs? Are you talking about a certain piece within the ribs that the highest, I guess, piece within that rib is the most crooked one? What are we looking at? I think the most important thing, I'm not here, taking it into scientifically to scrutinize it and say exactly what the scientists are saying, but I'll just use, I guess, these explanations and what the hadith is entailing, and then we'll let what the scientists would say about this. That's a different conversation. What the hadith is saying, that the rib that is the highest rib is basically the most crooked. So wait a minute, when you say a crooked rib, what does that have to do with anything in talking about women, take care of women, etc.? It's basically telling the men that a woman's body structure has a direct relationship with her psychology and a direct relationship to her character as well, that's psychology, and that a woman's bone and body structure was created to serve mainly one thing, which is, when you look at al-Badri, you're looking at the body structure. It was really to serve one thing, which basically is to give the man support. Okay? How did we get to giving man support? Because remember, Adam was incomplete without the woman, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the woman to give him that completion. And that anatomy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the woman in was to serve a certain purpose, but it can have an implication on the women, which إذا ذهبت تقيمه كسرته. If you would attempt to straighten it, attempt to change her physically, or attempt to change her, of course, character, in thinking that she needs to be like a man, she needs to be like how I am, then in that situation, you will break her, because that's not how she was created. Then you cannot force your way in changing it. You have to, therefore, appreciate, accept, and you have to deal with that creation that is definitely different, not only in its appearance, but it's different to the core, different to the bone. She's different in her anatomy, therefore she's different in her character, therefore you just have to accept that she is different, that certainly there's some fault, some mistakes, some shortcomings, that she will be probably more susceptible to committing than you as a man. Wait a minute, a woman is more susceptible? How did we get there? Because when you say وَإِن تَرَكْتَهُ لَمْ يَزَلْ أَعْوَجْ, so certainly the word itself in the hadith, it says, I'll look at the words and then I'll tell you the different interpretations. So if you were to correct that bone, then by quote unquote correcting it, you are going to be breaking it, because in its crookedness, in its bending structure, that is necessary to basically allow her to carry children, to carry basically the different structure that is needed for reproduction. If you attempt to change, whether we're speaking about pelvic, we're speaking about perhaps even the anatomy, bone structure within her body, if you attempt to change it, you're just going to break it, because it was created that way for a reason. Yes, it's not like the man structure, but if you attempt to make it like a man structure, then you're going to break it. It has to be that way. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, وَإِن تَرَكْتَهُ لَمْ يَزَلْ أَعْوَجْ, if you were to leave it that way, it's still going to be looking crooked. It's still going to look bent. You'll just have to leave it that way. You can't correct it. But that's okay. Perhaps literally, the Prophet ﷺ is basically speaking of a certain anatomy. But it's also telling us metaphorically that a woman's structure is affecting a woman's anatomy, a woman's bone structural, skeletal, etc., muscle mass, all these different things, the hormones, etc. They're completely different. And therefore, you cannot necessarily consider that it doesn't have an impact on her psychology. It's going to have an impact on her psychology, and the Prophet ﷺ is telling the Sahaba to understand that women are different to the bone, and therefore all the other things are going to be different as well. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't go in, let's say, the modern scientific words and the modern scientific description and the details of it, but he does explain it to the Sahaba, to their ability of what they know of science. And he tells them, well, they're built different. Therefore, you just have to accept that there are times that she's going to go hormonal and she's probably crying, not because you did something wrong, but because, who knows, it's just her hormones at the time. She's just crying because her hormones are making her cry. You probably didn't do anything wrong. Or probably she's coming at you, she's yelling at you, she's looking for someone to get her, I guess her hormones are going out there, and she's looking for someone to basically fight, and it happens to be you. And yes, that's what soothes her. And there you go. You're just perhaps the person that's not the lucky person to be around. But hey, you were the only one out there. And perhaps during that moment, she's probably in pain. Hey, but here's the other question. Is that necessarily justifiable that we would have our shortcomings? Or is that making us more susceptible to committing sin? That's another question. So according to the hadith, you look at the other hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he basically said that تصدقن, give donations. Because I had seen the majority of the dwellers of hellfire from women. So why? Is it our own anatomy? Is it our own structure? Is it why women? What does that have to do with a person's gender?
But most of the, I know where you're going with this, but also most of the inhabitants are in Jannah are women as well, right?
Oh, right. Al-Qurtubi said that. Al-Qurtubi said most of the dwellers in Jannah are women. Are they women? So that was the inference that Al-Qurtubi came out with. Al-Qurtubi came out with the inference that most of the dwellers of Jannah are women too. And he said because you have al-hur, because women outnumber men in general. So the inference was that the Prophet ﷺ, he was telling the women during that day or on that day, during that moment, that most of the dwellers in hellfire are women. But he was saying, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that most of the dwellers in Jannah are men. He was saying that no, he was telling them that most of the dwellers of hellfire are women, because he wanted to encourage them to donate, and that's a fact on Judgment Day. But women outnumber men because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically mentioned also in Surah An-Nisa, mentioned in Surah An-Nisa and basically Nisa and Kathira. What is the ayah? Okay, now I forgot the ayah right there. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically mentioned in Surah An-Nisa, giving a certain indication, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. When the ayah said رجالا كثيرا, many men. But when it said ونساء, Al-Qurtubi and other mufassirin had basically taken from that ayah that وَنِسَاءَ was not limited to the word kathira, but because it wasn't limited, it was indicative that women outnumber men. So Al-Qurtubi, from that inference, he said, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that women don't outnumber men in Jannah too. But that's not necessarily what it's so easy to create an inference and say, okay, well, let's use some numbers and statistics and get into that. But are we speaking about the question that really matters? Are we speaking about that most of the dwellers in Jannah are women, including the women that are hur, meaning created just for Jannah? Are we talking about the women of dunya making it to Jannah? If you're talking about women of dunya making it to Jannah, then that would not make sense, that most of them can be in hellfire and most of them can be in Jannah too. It wouldn't make sense because he's either going to be here or there, right? He's either going to be in Jannah or in hellfire. The other interpretation is that the Prophet ﷺ was saying, فَإِنِّي رَأَيْتُكُنَّ أَكْثَرَ أَهْلِ النَّارِ, that he had seen most of the people in hellfire were women, meaning that that's telling us that there's a large number of women making it to hellfire, but that does not mean that many more are also making it to Jannah. So the Prophet ﷺ is basically warning them that many will end up here, and that I had seen many women in hellfire. So make sure you give donations, make sure you do the good deeds, because I don't want you being one of those many women that would be in hellfire. So that's to encourage them. Am I making sense here? So that's the other interpretation, that he's basically saying exclusively that I had seen many women go to hellfire, but this is not to mean that many women are not going to Jannah. So that's the other interpretation in Lugha Arabiya, that many will also go to Jannah, but he was in the context of encouraging them, so therefore he was telling them, well, make sure you work hard to make it out of hellfire. Okay. فَاسْتَوْصُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ. So when it says فَاسْتَوْصُوا, when the Prophet ﷺ had said فَاسْتَوْصُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ, I thought we were created for each other. Oh, certainly we were created for each other. Certainly we were created for each other. It's not that one is basically created for someone else, but we were all both created for each other. فَاسْتَوْصُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ. You have to, of course, now this is the conclusion, is that you have to be careful, you have to take care of, you have to embrace the different changes in women and take care of them. Let's go for hadith 110. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ليس الشديد بالسرعة إنما الشديد الذي يملك نفسه عند الغضب. Let's say, the strong man is not the one who wrestles well, but the strong man is the one who controls himself when he is angry. Great translation. ليس الشديد بالسرعة. What is الشديد? The shadid is the mighty one. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ is redefining. It's not the bully that is strong. It's not the person that has, I don't know, a six-pack or whatever it is that's making a person strong. It's basically not the one that's capable of wrestling, the person that's probably capable of doing physical fighting is basically the person that is doing self-control. It's, in other words, it's not the outer control of the other, but it's actually the self-control. It's you learning how to control your anger, you learning how to control your impulsive behavior. That's what matters. Because if you're capable of not being, let's say, enslaved and encaged and imprisoned by your own impulsive behavior, then you're capable of controlling, one, the consequences of what decision makings you're controlling. Therefore, the impulsive behavior is not controlling you, but you are basically taking that moment to ensure that you are the one controlling, to a certain extent, controlling the consequences and controlling where you're going with this behavior, where you're going with your decision making, where your life is taking you. So you would basically determine your life based on your own self-containment. So يملك نفسه عند الغضب. Are we just talking about anger? Are we talking about other sentiments as well? So this hadith is mainly focusing on impulsive behavior, anger, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's exclusive to anger. Okay, so let's stop right here. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Inshallah, we'll continue. إن بين يدي الساعة أياما يرفع فيها العلم وينزل فيها الجهل ويكثر فيها الهرج والهرج القتل. العبادة في الهرج كهجرة إلي بادروا بالأعمال فتنا كقطع الليل المظلم يصبح الرجل مؤمنا ويمسي كافرا أو يمسي مؤمنا ويصبح كافرا يبيع دينه بعرض من الدنيا. Okay, so inshallah,
I have a comment.
go ahead, Noura.
And I know that my knowledge of Arabic is not يعني very good, but could it have been most most of the women are in hellfire because could it be directly related to the money aspect of it?
How did you see that, Noura?
I that's what I'm saying. I don't know because my
No, I'm trying to see how you came to that inference to answer the question, or even comment. How did you relate money?
well,
Uh,
because he's talking about giving sadaqah. And
oh,
it could have been any other reason that he told the women to yani and that's what you
I
see what
never
I'm saying?
thought about that. Love it, Noura. I never thought about that really. So he's telling them to give sadaqah. I love that. I never thought about it. It never occurred to me.
I just thought of it. I don't know.
Tell me more of how you got to that. I love it.
No, I was just thinking because I mean it would make I mean I don't know the situation that exactly the situation where he was telling them this, but
Hmm.
out of all the things, why would he tell them that? You know what I mean? It has to be
Hmm.
related somehow to the hellfire and Jannah.
In money.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to give you some more data about the hadith. There is sadaqat al-fitr and the sadaqah for al-Eid, basically, which is after the Ramadan. So the Prophet ﷺ the women were in one area, and the Prophet ﷺ had Bilal with him. And Bilal had kind of like a rag that he was basically reaching out, and they didn't have a box, I guess. So it was like a rag. And Bilal ibn Rabah was saying, I was capable of seeing these women basically standing, and the women were basically having gold, and they were having jewelry and etc. And the Prophet ﷺ wanted to encourage them to give sadaqah. So that's when he told them that. So that was the context of it. But I love the point that you had made. Is money at all relevant to why women become more susceptible to such a fitna? Is it money? Is it because they are probably are busy to not get a job, and then they become susceptible to fitna? I don't know. Well, on the other hand, you would see the Prophet ﷺ encouraging men to also donate, but he didn't tell them such a thing. He didn't say, donate because I had seen many of you in hellfire. So why the context of that? So that would be really interesting. So I don't know. I don't really know the answer. And also, I
Or
would
just the love of it, that
just, do
yeah.
women love money more than men?
Well, I mean, so what they were doing was the dealing with the jewelry, right? Like you said. So could it be just the love for the dunya and material things? I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know. It's just an idea I had.
I know we love jewelry, but if you were to give a woman a block of gold and a necklace, okay, a smart woman would say, well, a block of gold or a golden nugget, it depends on the weight, is probably what I would choose if it's, say, heavier. But in general, if we didn't know about the weight and the value and etc. But you would say that they're more into aesthetics than actually the amount of money. Am I right?
Yeah, I guess you could analyze it different ways.
Right, right.
Please, what the number of hadith that Sister Noura comment on it, please? Which number? 100 and...
Well, the hadith that Noura is commenting on is one of the hadith that I said along. So we were
that's
talking
here.
about,
Yeah.
when we were talking about this one, we mentioned the hadith the Prophet ﷺ actually said, رَأَيْتُكُنَّ أَكْثَرَ أَهْلِ النَّارِ. I had seen most of the dwellers in hellfire are from the women, or رَأَيْتُكُنَّ, or I had seen most of the women basically enter hellfire. Okay, differences of opinions on how we interpret the hadith. Okay, so Noura is saying, well, why would the Prophet ﷺ say tasaddaqan? And then during that context, he would say, well, do this, because I had seen many of the women dwelling in hellfire. Well, if you continue the hadith, Noura, there's maybe the other segment of it, where the Prophet ﷺ, the woman questioned, so why are we the most to dwell in hellfire? Why us? What did we do wrong? And the Prophet ﷺ said, تُكْثِرْنَا اللَّعْنَ وَتَكْفُرْنَا الْعَشِيرَ. Okay, said you continuously, and you keep damning things.
No, their tongue.
Complaining, continuous complaints, basically. Continuous damning of things, continuously complaining of things, and always feeling that hopeless, helpless, etc. Why is everything like this? Why am I the victim here, etc.? Okay. And the second part is takfurna al-ashir. Even when there's a contribution, somebody helps. Oh, you never help. You're always this. You're always that, and never recognize that anyone is doing any support, and you would only focus that you're the one that's doing everything, and that other people, and even your husband or your family, your parents, they're not doing enough.
Not say alhamdulillah for anyone.
And right. So according to the hadith, it's that, when you see, it's quite interesting. So who's telling them to saddaqn, but at the same time, when that sahabi is wondering, well, why? What is it that we do wrong? The Prophet ﷺ was basically explaining the details since she had asked. But he didn't necessarily say because you want money. He didn't say that it was related to money at all.
Well, the two must be related somehow.
Perhaps. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that as our homework, and while you're doing your daily chores, let's think about it and see what we could find. And I'll do my little homework, and really see what other scholars had to say about this, and if there's any, I guess,
Jazakallah khair. I know you have a lot of things to do.
that way I would have something to think about, right?
Yeah, subhanallah.
Rather than seeing myself as a victim. Right?
Alhamdulillah.
This is it. Inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. By the way, yesterday, I did something really strange. Yesterday, instead of